head of one of Bain & Company's 6 main practices. So he's over a lot of the partners, and he's partnered for a long time at let's see, Mexico City, Dallas, and Houston, right? And so obviously really great career, and would love to get to hear more from him. We already gave him a gift, so if you're skeptical of the fact that we did not give him a gift in this session, don't judge us. We have already hosted him well, I promise. But that said, let's see, there will be a short reception to follow. So if you all would like to come to that, we'll have some complimentary appetizers and a chance to spend time together at 11:30, the restaurant that's right in this Thursday center. So all of you are welcome. We know that not everybody can be able to make it. That's okay. But yeah, without further ado, Mr. Hernan.
Thank you. All right. So if you were in my first session, this will be totally different. In my first session, I went over 75 slides very quickly. We have a few minutes to actually bat it back and forth. I'm going to do the opposite here. I'm going to go over 12 slides, and then you should ask me lots of questions. It should be totally informal. I've been a consultant for 22 years. You're here presumably you're interested in consulting. I can tell you what it's like. You know, this involves fun things, and I've consulted 6 continents that have business. So I thought I would do 3 things. The first one is talk a little bit about how to be a great consultant. And I'm actually going to use materials that we use and they're probably not very different from the ones that they use at Deloitte or the ones that they use at Pricewaterhouse or the ones that they use at the Carpenter Kit. Because being a Bain consultant or a KISS consultant is a few things that I'll describe. I will then talk to you about the interview. Like, how do these interviews actually take place? Why do they take place? Right? How do you maximize the ability to get an offer? And then we'll hopefully do a lot of Q&A. As you would expect, being a great consultant it depends on what vantage point you're taking, right? If you are the partner or manager, right, your biggest concern is how quickly can they get up to speed? Because you will finish Thunderbird somewhere. 2 days later, you have to be an expert at telco. So getting up to speed really quickly is really hard, but very important. Your client will ask similar questions, right? How experienced are they? Consultants have a terrible reputation. You know, the income, the diploma hasn't tried if you show up, but I've been here 25 years and you're going to tell me how to run my business. So speaking the language, the one thing I always do is I don't show up on a client side unless I know the language. And every single industry has a language. The other thing that we have a horrible reputation, all of us, is being super arrogant. Right? You go to a great business school like Hebert, you get a great job, and you show up and you're going to tell people exactly what to do. Well, that doesn't fly really well. Your case team will really care. I mean, in consulting, we work with teams, but the assignments are individual. And so you are more important than ever as a part of a team. If your input doesn't come in, I actually cannot start the end. And so the teaming is really important. And you live in an office, right? And so you're either a culture carrier, right? Somebody that's incredibly fun and produces a lot of positive energy, or you're not. When I interview partners, right? These are three very representative quotes. Right, one statement that I hear a lot is, look, nobody has the full package, right? You hire them as consultants because, right, when you're 26 years old, you're not a partner. You need to go through 5, 7, 9 years of training and things like that. But most consultants have 1 or 2 fastballs. Fastball number 1 is you're amazingly good analytically. fastball number two is you're amazingly good with clients. I often hear, look, there's no substitute for cracking a business problem, even if you're amazing with clients. If you can't stay ahead on where you're supposed to be the expert, right, then your value as a consultant is pretty low. And teaming is kind of almost table stakes. So it's hard to become somebody that differentiates himself as a keeper. The short answer, look, is that this is a business around two things, right? It's a business around intellectual skills, and I'm going to talk about exactly what I mean with intellectual skills and people skills, which, by the way, makes it a really hard job. Right? Investment bankers don't need that many people skills. They interact less, right? It is a transactional interaction. And what they want to create is a transaction to happen, and they want to get paid as a percent of that. We show up every day for 4 days, for many weeks, for many months. And it's not in sales, right? You don't have to be particularly smart. You just have to be incredibly charming. And if you're incredibly charming, people want to hang out with you, and eventually they'll buy from you. Nobody pays the fees that we get for being charming. So that makes it a very hard job. What do consultants who are successful do or not do? They don't do rigorous enough analysis. That's one big problem. If you're going to do the analysis at the level at which a client does the analysis, why are you here? Is the question you'll often get. They don't become an expert. Again, there's languages in businesses, and if you don't speak that language, you're an outsider. And if you're an outsider, it's going to be very hard to meet you like that. Now, in the airline industry, people talk about RASM, revenue per air seat at CASM, cost per airline seat. So if you talk about revenue, it doesn't mean anything in that industry. And what you call airports, they call stations. And what we call planes, they call birds. If you don't know that language, and by the way, there's public companies in virtually every industry, and there's analysts. If you read the analyst reports, everything that looks like jargon, that's the language of thought. Proactivity is one of the big things in our industry. So the big difference between the best consultants and the okay consultants is I give you a task, the task comes back zero defect and on time. That's a good consultant. It does that, but brings back the insight and the suggested next steps. That's a great consultant. Because I have to, right? I mean, I want to go home early and hang out with the kids. And so I don't want to have to think about every single next step for every single one of my consultants. My job is already pretty tough. If people are doing that for me, right, two things are happening. I am very happy, but number two, they're already learning how to do my job. And then feeling like a victim is a terrible thing, right? And these jobs are horrible, and I'll describe in what way they're horrible. Because you're not the client, right? You're the consultant. And so when their data comes, you have to crunch that data. And when you ask for it on Monday, hoping that it was available on Tuesday, so you could crunch it on Wednesday and Thursday, and it arrives on Friday night, you're going to crunch it on the weekend. And that's the way it works. And if you feel like a victim, you're the wrong professional. Now, we tried all types of things for that not to happen. That stuff happened. That stuff happened. So I'm going to give you 10 tips, and I'm going to cover each one of them because they're the 10 tips we give folks. The first one is you gotta know what you're solving. Most of us, when we start in this profession, are incredibly excited and also incredibly incompetent. Right? We haven't done this 30 times, that's why we're new. And so our inclination is, I'm not going to ask anything, I'm going to ask confident, I'm going to act confident that I'm just going to deploy. Right? And those deployments often end up in islands, nowhere close to the continent we were looking. And so, just like you've heard probably in interviews, repeat the question to your interviewer. Right? In a consulting world, you gotta repeat the question to the manager or whoever you're working with. Like, who's doing what? What am I doing? What is the reason why I'm doing this? How do I tease out an insight if I don't know the rationale of what I'm doing? What is the output going to look like? What are you expecting from it? Right? 100 slides, 3 slides, an Excel spreadsheet, 4 numbers, and when is it due? If you literally leave without that, that's highly problematic. Just highly problematic. A second super important skill is zero defect. And zero defect means that you don't make mathematical mistakes. If you come to me and I take the numbers for granted because I trust you, we can spend our entire time thinking about the implications of those numbers. What does it mean for the client? What should the client decide? How do we get the client to get comfortable with that decision? If I don't trust your numbers, I'm going to get into Excel or Algebras or Tableau. And that's a terrible use of my time. And so, right, if you do it once, you do it once. You've done it 3 times, right? Managers or partners are getting really worried about it. I don't know that I can trust you. So what's the thing to do here? You know, there's always this excitement when you're new, right? So you sort of literally, you're done, you print, it's warm, and you take it to your manager. Paper should never be warm. Never. Let it cool down. Right? Let it cool down. Sit down in your office, sit down in your cube and say, do these numbers make sense? Start from the output. What would make it weird for this number to be true? And then sort of say, where could I have likely run a formula that didn't make sense? We all make mistakes. If you make them on a continuous basis, you're not going to be able to go. Right? Probably also not a good engineer. There's hundreds of professions where sort of manipulating Excel spreadsheets, right, is not important. The third piece of advice is think about the so what, right? We're not professors. We don't create science for the sake of science. And we don't create decks because they're pretty. The only thing that we do, technically, is affect decisions and actions. In fact, at Bain, we always start with, you could always start with like, what data is available? What analysis could I run? You know, what outputs could I get from the analysis? How might that be interesting to my client? That's a terrible way to do that, as opposed to, what do we think the client ought to do? Why is it hard for them to do that? What type of insight would inform making that decision? What type of analysis could create that insight? Can I go get that data? Because in today's world, data is way too available. If you could run any analysis on any data, right, you will never stop doing it. So the so what is really important. It's around 2 things. It's about how a client might ask you about it. Right? Both the process, like where did you get the data, how did you run the analysis, and then what are the next steps? The next steps may be the next iteration of the analyses, the next steps may be checking it with the client, or it may actually be going to the client with a final report. So up to now, I basically was speaking to you about the analytical part of my job, right? And what I said is like you kind of know where you're headed, right? You know the point of arrival. You don't know the point of arrival, you're going to run really fast, you're going to get somewhere else. Number two, you have to run really good analytics. And number three, the analytics need to move to insights that actually give you the solution. That's basically what we do. Somebody asked me on lunch today, who do you hire at Bain? We hire smart and nice people. Smart means does those three things. I can take a question and define a point of arrival. I can break the point of arrival and the problem into a set of pieces where I can run analytics. And I can reconstruct the insights from the analytics into a formal recommendation. That's what I mean. That's what I mean with nice. One of the things that's nice is pithy communications. When you've been doing consulting, you've run all types of processes. You've collected data, you've manipulated the data, you've played with the data. Telling me the story of everything you did with the data is very uninteresting. Right? Very uninteresting. And so being not process first, but what we call answer first is super important. And what you do is you basically, I always say, can you put everything you learn in one highly linear logical slide in 18-point font? And if you can't, you haven't thought about that. It's very easy to draw out 18 slides. It's very hard to write one slide in 18-point font. I also call it the elevator test. You're a consultant, year one, right? And you're going to ride up in the elevator with the CEO who just ran into you. And the CEO asks, oh, you're one of the Bain guys. How's it going? There's two potential answers around your work stream. Oh, great. You know, I've called 172 of your customers located in the following places, and 82 of them have answered the phone with me. I'm about to create a slide. Or I've talked to 82 of your customers, and about 2/3 are very, very loyal, but I'm finding that 1/3 of them are churning. And I really want to investigate whether there's a churn problem. Analyst, business advisor. Same minute, same night on the elevator. So can you actually be incredibly brief, focused, and clear? And by the way, that communication is not just with that CEO, it's with the manager of your case. And so my wife makes fun of me. She says that I speak in outline form. Because after 22 years of Bain, that's what I do. Right? Everything is in outlines in my head. And so I know at what level I'm supposed to be communicating. And when somebody says, I like your point too, I'm like, well, I got ABC for you. Right? So, similarly, right, you want to sort of master the kind of 5-slide loop. And that is, here's the problem. Here's what I think the answer is. Here's the process. Here's what I would do differently. And by the way, I don't mean that you create these slides, but you literally go through the process of these. And this starts organizing your thinking. And then you start to realize when you're talking too much about this is how I got to my answer versus this is actually the answer. Or this is the answer versus these are the actual implications for it. So part of nice in the smart and nice sort of combination is the ability to just communicate in a simple way.
It is remarkable how smart you will appear.
Simply by being able to simplify communications. It may be my favorite skill for people. Right? If you speak in run-on sentences, somebody that speaks in outline form is always going to beat you. Just remember that. Just remember that. It is part of the reason why we communicate in bullets, not in prose. Right? Because our job is to simplify the world for people, not make it more complex. The other part of DICE is client relationships. And by the way, you already have a competitive advantage coming from people. Because all of you have either international backgrounds or an incredible interest in international experiences. And when you're an international human being, you have to erase the assumptions about how the world works and reread them in your new context and recreate social interaction. And by definition, you become infinitely more nuanced about the people that you're meeting and how those people interact. So both the psychology of people and the sociology. And by the way, that's what we do. In highly hierarchical systems, and my clients, I behave very differently from a highly flat system. Totally different. And so building relationships is really important. The substitution of building relationships for being super smart, well-informed, learning the language and being ahead is why the most common failure for extroverts in our business. You get sloppy. Right? You're charming enough to get breakfast with the client, but not smart enough to be informed enough. That's the logic. It's a great compliment, it's not a substitute. Another part of NICE is just being a super team player. Now, super team player is defined within the boundaries of a consulting firm. I've worked in one of them. I can tell you what it means to be a great team player in my firm. I haven't worked in the other one, so I cannot tell you what it means to be a great team player in those others. But I can tell you that this actually makes a big difference. Because we totally depend on each other all the time. This is not like, you know, in business school, I remember we had teams of 4, and what we said is like every 4 assignments you do. That's not how it works here. Right? People are working on different parts of the puzzle and they come together. There's no way to delegate. The other thing that's really important is understanding the people that you work with. You are 2% of their time, they're 100% of your time. This is true for clients, this is true for your managers and partners, right? I think it's still me. But basically, what ends up happening is, right, if you work at a client that's 100% of your assignment, technically from a professional life perspective, that's 100% of your life. But I, as a partner, may have 3 cases going on at this particular client and 2 at another client. And each case has 5 consultants. So you're like 10% of my time at best. And if you don't leverage my time, treat my time that way, it's a problem. Right? It's a problem. So when I walk in to see a CEO, I usually bring 1 slide. I have thought through that slide a lot because that CEO is probably 50% of my time, and I'm probably 2% of his or her time. The other thing is that this is an apprenticeship culture, meaning none of you are born good consultants, and Thunderbird doesn't turn you into a good consultant. It gives you language and experiences. You learn how to paint when you have Picasso in front of you. And so
if you are basically an absorption machine, if you watch the more senior consultants, the managers, and the partners in how they think about the world, crack cases, do analyses, tease out implications, build relationships with clients, and you sort of imbibe that, you're going to get better and better. And if you don't finish your week with what did I learn from different people, right, you have missed a huge opportunity. And if you finish your week with what did I learn from different people and how I'm going to change what I did last week to be a different consultant this week, and you do that 50 weeks at a time, then you start getting on these incredibly amazing trajectories, right? People often say, like, you know, consulting is amazing because for every year in consulting, it's like 3 years outside of consulting, right? If you look at sort of promotion patterns, where I can jump as a consultant versus where my classmates from business school went at different corporations. That's not because, right, because we have some magic trick to place consultants at corporations. It's because the way that we've trained you is totally different, right? In corporations, right, I don't expect you to get infinitely better every month. I just expect you to do your job. Right? At Bain, I'm expecting you to get better and better, so I do less and less. And if I do less and less, I have more time for other stuff, personal and professional. But that's my expectation all the time. The last thing is, the last tip is, like, if you don't have a life, like, you're gonna burn out. How you define life is totally different for different people, right? Totally different for different people. But you know, whatever it is that is really important to you, you better be able to do it. If not, you will burn out, right? You will burn out. And so if you don't start at the very beginning of your career, respecting your personal boundaries, it becomes harder and harder over time. And then you're like, God, I became a partner, but I don't have any friends. That's kind of a bummer, right? So when I was running Bain, Texas, I was pretty aggressive about checking everyone's hours in the week. Funny, in some places, they would check the hours to make sure they're high, right? I'm checking them to make sure they're low. I don't want anyone to not have time to do their personal stuff. The slide that, this is a different nomenclature. Hopefully it says exactly the same thing to you. This is Hernan's list. On value, right, you have to have a pretty effective approach, right? Meaning you know where the thing is heading. That's the hypothesis, the point of arrival. And then you have a very high quality way to get there. It's quick, but zero deflect. And coming out of it, it's highly insightful. That's smart. What we call smart in our business. In some ways, the best way to think about it is somebody describes a picture for you, and you literally can paint it very quickly. And say, oh, it has clouds, it has grass, it has a farmhouse, and it has 2 cows. And then you can slice it with an X-Acto knife, the way you would like break out a puzzle. And say, I'm now going to give people parts of the puzzle to really think about it. Were they cows, or was it 2 rhinos? Was it actually in Africa? And was it really a farmhouse, or was it a castle? Right? And then my 5 members of my team go and really get these specifics correct. And then a really good consultant can then put it back together and say, oh my God, no, it was the savannah in Africa. Right? That's where we were headed. On the client side, to me, there's a couple of things. Number one is the ability to gain trust, which is built through a relationship. So the question is not relationship, it's trust, from my perspective. And the ability to communicate incredibly effectively. I almost would put communication on both sides of the fence, because people who have like speaking run-on sentences sound up, and they certainly don't get their message across. Right? And in fact, people who are not saying anything particularly smart, who speak in outline form, sound very smart, because they simplify the world. We're in an information overload world, all of us. Simplification is always helpful. And then there's a passion for results, right? I mean, consultants get a really bad reputation for like, you know, show me your watch, I'll give you the time. Or create a deck and it gets stored. If you don't have a passion for results, you're in the wrong business. You gotta be angry if your recommendations are not becoming actions. And then from a team perspective, the things that I think a lot about are engagement, right? Like you're always there to help the team get better, right? So it is a 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 6. And you're doing your part in being more than one. You have to be very proactive on your professional development. This is my idea of like step back every Friday and literally say, what did I learn that would make me better on Monday, and do it. And the cumulative impact of that is enormous. Right? Don't be a nerd, right? You gotta create boundaries, right? Otherwise, this business gets terrible. Again, if you don't develop the boundary, you get promoted to partner and you have no idea how to live your life. Right? So it's actually not worth it. And eventually, there's one that comes up, right? Which is you have to be fairly inspirational. You know, most of the people that I hire are super smart, right? So I don't have to make them smart, right? They're super motivated. They get job offers all the time, right? Most important thing I can be, super inspirational. Right? I would take that job, but I would have to stop working with this guy, not doing that. Those skills change a little bit over time. At the very beginning, the analysis is bigger. The working with clients is a little bit smaller, at least in the sense that you work with people higher down and lower down in the organization. Over time, right, as you become more experienced, you end up managing more people, right? You even end up codifying stuff. Any questions on this topic? We'll get back to it at the end, but if there's any questions on the, what a great, yes.
What are the best ways to build up your language in a particular industry as quickly as possible?
I was pretty intense at this, but this is what I used to do. What I used to do was actually disappear for 48 hours as soon as I knew what my assignment was. And I would basically download the annual reports for every company in the industry, and the analyst reports, particularly the ones called initiating coverage, which are the big ones, for every competitor in the industry. And then if I could get any market research reports or within the Bain system, knowledge system, any decks from that industry. And then I literally would read it all once and highlight anything that was interesting. And then I would go back and only look at the highlights and categorize things. Is this a market interesting thing, a competitor interesting thing, a customer segmentation interesting thing, a economic model interesting thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then I would have a page, and then I would sort of organize the page, and I called it the cheat sheet. And I had it. By the way, all the language was there. And people thought I was crazy. That being said, I never once got the comment, you don't know my business. I knew exactly how to speak their language when I showed up. Yes?
So for someone who wants to pursue consulting, what are some of the ways to develop that analytical ability right for the consultant role, except for case studies?
It's a good question. I think that most problems in life lend themselves to this, right? From the personal ones to the professional ones to anything, right? Because basically it's always like, what is the question that I'm answering? Well, I like to do something called SCQA, situation, complication, question, answer. So what's the situation? Why am I thinking about it? Something must be complicated, otherwise I wouldn't think about it. Right, what is the, that's me. You'll be glad to know it's my mother from Costa Rica. She's 75 years old and calls me every day, just to make sure I'm okay.
And we're really glad it wasn't one of our students.
Yes. Well, the other day I was teaching at Yale, and the thing shows up, the phone, and it was actually his phone, but my alarm clock. I was like, I don't know how to feel, right? This is the moment that I most hate in the day, right? That alarm moment. Where was I? Every problem, and so I go with the situation, complication, and then I say, what is the question at hand? And then I go into answer mode, which is what is the likely point of arrival, right? And sort of what is the competitive answer, and what type of data could I use or insight could I use to decide what? And I write it down, and then you start getting your head to that. We sort of gut things out as opposed to step back and think about it. And what we consultants do is we don't gut things out. We step back and think about it. But that's what we do. There's a book called The Pyramid Principle by a woman named Barbara Minter, which I find incredibly helpful. And what she does is she does, my version of like clouds, etc., like puzzle. She basically gives you a methodology how every problem can be broken up into a pyramid. And she teaches you about mutually exclusive and completely exhaustive methodologies like MISI, which is the way we think. Right? That's really helpful. But case studies is awesome, right? I mean, I was lucky enough to get jobs from a lot of consulting firms, and it wasn't because I'm really smart, it's because I had done 80 case studies with one of my buddies who also got a bunch of job offers.
Hello.
Hi.
This is in context to building trust and communication. And I read an article about learning credibility tension, and you talked about how consultants need to learn really fast and show that they know about the industry. And I guess my question is, where do you draw the line between, hey, I know your industry, but I'm not, I don't come across as fake, and I'm still building trust.
I mean, look, portraying yourself as what you're not is, you're going to be caught eventually, right? The other thing is timing plays a big difference, right? In the first 2 weeks of the case and the first 1 or 2 times I meet every individual, I start by saying, I'm going to ask a lot of stupid questions. Right? I know your industry, I know the language in your industry, but I'm not the expert. You are. And so I'd love to get from you some perspectives. Right? You can't use that a month in. You're done, right? And so that's very important. Now, that being said, I mean, probably, right, the hardest thing for me to learn as a partner was, and it even made it to one of my performance reviews, was I always felt I had to have an answer. And the reality is, a CEO running sort of Walmart is going to have a question for me that I don't know the answer for, no matter how well I prepared for that meeting. And so being able to say, look, I don't have an answer, here's how I would think about it, I'm going to come back, is a very important skill. Now, if it's smack in the middle of what they ask you to work on and you don't have an answer, that's more of a problem, right? So I'm going to describe an interview process. Again, this is the one that I know. It's the one that we're running, right? All of them are somewhat like this. They're variations of this. Right? Ours probably has more case studies because of the nature of the work we do. A lot of them have a lot of experiential interviews. We do less of that. I'll describe it though. So again, what am I looking for, right? I'm going to judge 2 things. Can you deliver results? And will the people working with you really embrace you. Can you deliver results is you can structure thinking, you can go logically from A to B, you have reasonable business judgment in what the conclusions might mean. You're pretty creative, right? Again, if problems were linear, they wouldn't hire me. They wouldn't pay my fees for a linear problem. And I want to see somebody that's dedicated to achieving results, right? People are like, well, why don't you hire the people that have got a 2.0 GPA in college and scored a 500 in a GMAT and have a 2.4 GPA in business school, even if they're really smart? Well, because they have a track record of not showing A behavior. And my business is built on delivering A behavior 100% of the time. I mean, is there one of 100 of those that one day would change completely their mind? Presumably, right? Am I going to take that risk on the brand of my company? Absolutely not. Right? So there's a reason why we hire, right, people with extraordinary records, because they show, right, that they deliver behavior. It's a great signaling mechanism in the labor market that basically says, I deliver A, and A is what I'm looking for. On the client team side, right, I need you to be articulate. Again, sort of I literally interviewed a partner from a separate consulting firm that really wants to join Bain. And this person literally, I would ask a question, and 3 minutes later, I was able to introduce myself again, and I had no idea what was said. Right? There were so many sentences. I was like, I have no clue what just happened. I want articulate. I want people who speak in a pithy way. I want evidence of team. I'm looking for people who are leaders, right? Because eventually, right, in less than 2 years, at least in my company, you end up running my teams. And in our business, at least in our firm, I want you to be super down to earth. Because most of us are super down to earth. And so it wouldn't be a good fit if you were not. How do we interview most people? We interview most people with case interviews. And I'll describe those in a second. And case interviews are no different from the exercise that I would do with my team on the first week of a case. Right? So it's actually highly reflective of how we all think, and therefore highly reflective of how you would do if you were working in our business. Sometimes we do written cases, and we will certainly do an experience interview. And the experience interview will feel incredibly experience-based. What you don't know is actually it's a case. But we're also testing, in all of these, we're testing how would you fit in our culture, how would you fit in our teams. The experience interviews, some people do them super open-ended. I think HR would tell you, right? HR professionals would say that's a terrible way to interview, right? Unless you're like a magnificent reader of people, this is helpless. And unconscious bias will eat you, right? You won't even know what you're doing. The mini cases are awesome because I can literally grab a single line of any of your resumes and create a case based on it. Which means, by the way, that if you haven't thought through every single line in your resume and how I'm going to turn it in a case, you're already behind because your classmates at Wharton are doing that. That's how well prepared they are for an interview. They've seen every single line of their resume. They've thought of how it gets turned into a case, and they're ready to actually answer the case. And then again, what the HR professional would tell you is that if you really want to do experience interviews, behavioral interviews are great. Right? This is when you actually ask a question so that you give me an example of something in your life. And so remind me of a time when you were in a team and it didn't work. Why did it not work? By the way, there's 20 of these questions total in the world. Once again, the analogs of you at Wharton have practiced those 20 questions. If you're sitting in an interview and you get the question, remind me of a time that you did not get along with the people on your team, and you're caught flat-footed, right? It's the end. Because the people competing with you in the jobs have thought through that. They have the answer. Well, isn't that unfair? No, actually, the trait of preparing perfectly is precisely the trait that we're looking for, right? We don't ever want anyone flat-footed in front of a client. That's it. That's how it works. So if you're like literally like a complete A-type and you need to do like an amazing job all the time, this is a great profession. People always say to me, is time and travel the problem with your profession? I'm like, no, it's energy. If you're like, you know, sometimes I want to bring in my A game and sometimes I want to sort of just hit it and pass, it's a terrible profession, right? Because everyone else around you is actually playing the A game. Again, on the experience interview, part of the problem is that people speak in run-on sentences. It's just so hard, right? And so people get so excited about who they are that they tell me too much. And they miss the point that I'm actually looking for a specific answer. I'm wanting you to make a point that it's memorable for me, right? Where after I've interviewed 14 people, I remember you. And so this is why, like, you just gotta be ready. Gotta be ready. I'm going to get 3 personal questions. What messages do I want to leave behind? Not different from what we do at clients. I have an hour, I have 30 minutes with client X. No matter how the game plays, what 2 messages do I have to nail? The cases are typically a 40-minute experiences, right? There's a little bit of introduction, there's a little bit of question at the end, but it's really a case. There's 4 types of cases. At Bain, we mostly do business unit strategy. So we're going to ask you 2 questions, right? Either should you go sell something somewhere, growth strategy case, or where is the profitability problem in your given business? Why? Because I don't need you guys to be rocket scientists. So I'm not going to ask how many, you know, golf balls fit in a 747. I need you to basically answer business unit strategy questions, which is what we answer. That being said, if you're applying to a more financially minded firm, you know, investment strategy questions are very typical. If you are applying to a Carney or, right, the supply chain division of Booz Allen Hamilton, that name has changed, you're actually going to be doing performance improvement questions. So how do you actually play this game? Basically, identify the question. No different from the way I was telling you to be a good consultant, right? You're so nervous, you get asked a question, you start answering another question, right? And you're so nervous, 20 minutes later, you decide to look back at me, and I say to you, you're answering another question. So you go back and you say, right, I think the question you asked me was X, Y, Z. Is that correct, right? Yes, right? Then you structure the problem, right? This is where I said you paint a picture and you divide it up into 5 components. In a growth strategy case, it's typically the market, the customers, the competitors, and the company, right? In a P&L case, it's revenue, which is P times Q times mix, and costs. And either it's going to be a variable versus fixed type of problem, or it's going to be an SG&A versus COGS problem. And so just break it, show the picture, break it into pieces, talk to me. I want to see your brain. I can't see it, so talk to me so that I can actually at least hear it. Most people, right, in the places where we recruit regularly are amazing at this one and this one. Because they know how to get a job with consulting. You practice. You know, where most people break down is like once you get into the guts of the case, right, it's harder to be totally prepared unless you've done that particular case in the past. And so should I go down the market route, the customer segmentation route, the competitor benchmarking route, right? a little bit of business judgment, right? Are you good enough at reading the body language of the interviewer to basically say, I just went down the wrong path, let me fix that immediately? Or are you so nervous that you're just running? And at least at Bain, we don't like it when people answer the case and they're like, you know, it's very important to us, like, what did you learn? If you're about to talk to a CEO, what are you going to tell that CEO? So close that loop with a recommendation. In written cases, what firms typically do, we hardly ever do it, is they give you a bunch of slides and a kind of a case write-up. And they basically say, given the context and the problem, do you want, you know, come back with sort of the best recommendation? And part of the slides are completely worthless, right? They're just there to create noise. You know, the big tips for the case interview, reiterate the question. Right? If you've been practicing with the 5 forces model and it's not good for this case, don't use it. Right? I've watched like people do like, you know, the most complicated sort of aerobics. I was like, literally, how are you going to fit this one into the last F? This is awful. Don't be exhaustive, right? What I'm looking for in 40 minutes is the big insight. Over communicate. Read your interviewer, right? Your interviewer wants you to do well. Most of us, like, you can figure out if we know, like, with our face or our body motions. Drive to an answer, including sort of like what you would tell the client on what we call Monday morning, and then act relaxed. I mean, I've had people who come in and do cases, and they have sweat through 3 layers at the end, right? And even if they answered that case correctly, right, they're not going to get hired because I cannot, you know, hire this person and put them in front of a client unless I have like some type of vacuum, you know, a thing that, right? So if you're like totally uncomfortable, I'm like, this is not a good fit. I'm going to do you a favor, right? You don't want to live like this. So that's real, because everything you do is high stakes, right? And the moment you get comfortable in any one of these firms, we're going to make you uncomfortable again, right? Once you're comfortable being the guy who asked or gal that actually asked for data, and you can work with the sort of finance person, we're going to like get you out of there and have you talk to the CFO. And then you will sweat again through 3 layers. My last piece of advice is like, look, if you get into a consulting interviews, you got to get started early. You're competing for jobs with people who write a resume up before they start business school, right? That they've decided where they want to study before, where they want to go work before they start. Where they have actually found former employees that were hired as undergrads of those firms that are in their classrooms and who have done tens of cases. And you don't have that here. I didn't have it at Cornell when I was there. You have to replicate it. Right? Life's not fair. Yeah, it's not. But you're still going to get a job. Right? Keep an eye on time, right? If you speak in run-ons, right, this is a problem, right? You can always stop your statement short. And if somebody wants more, they're going to tell you, I want more. Right? Practice these experience questions. Again, your resume. It's a crime if you don't know the case of every bullet point, because I can ask you that case. And for the 20 experience questions, just know them, right? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What would people who like you say? What would people who don't like you say? What was it like with a team that really worked? What was a bad team like? Right? I mean, these questions exist. And then, you know, you have to be truthful with the employers of why you want to work wherever you want to work, right? There's nothing more transparent than when people come to me and say, you are without a doubt the firm that I want to work for. I'm like, yeah, you just said this to three different firms in the last 2 weeks, right? And I know, right? All right, I don't want to do more slides. I want you guys to ask me questions.
First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very helpful. My question is, how do you strike the balance between wanting to deliver rapid results and having doubts and needing to ask those key questions?
In some ways, it depends a little bit on the firm you work for, right? So I don't want to misguide you. I work in a firm where you're supposed to ask questions, and where in fact the failure modes are typically people trying to step up to the next role, and they've been amazing at the last role, and they got used to not asking questions in the last role, and they step up and they don't ask questions. Dumb. And so I would say ask questions. Now, if you're in a firm that tells you you're asking too many questions, now you know. But I think that this notion of running as fast as we run in consulting and not knowing the point of arrival, it's just going to get you to the wrong island.
Back here.
Yes, the Glassdoor ranking of companies, the best places to work, actually gave Bain #1 for 2019. If you would pick the one reason behind that, what is the most single thing you do differently?
A Bain never lets a Bain down. It's the motto we live by, right? It's the motto we live by. We're always trying to find which Bain is struggling and figuring out how to help them. And that's just a very special part of our culture, right? So people, you know, in most of these alpha cultures, great support is not often, right? Many of these are, you know, they're up or out cultures, right? With very good out prospects, both in terms of probability and where you are at. And so we have this culture that basically says you just never let another Bain fail. And that's how we operate. That's exactly how we operate. We could all say that phrase to you, right? You would ask 500 of us, we would all say a Bain never lets a Bain down.
Over here.
Hi, so I go to WP Carey, and there are a lot of firms that have no alumni. How would you recommend getting your foot in the door at a place where you don't know anybody?
And I was going to say alumni, so you just made my answer. Oh, God, so hard. So literally, how did I, you know, I was at Cornell 20 years ago when Cornell did not have a strong consulting program. And I mean, the story is like, you know, it's phenomenal, right? First of all, I got 0 summer interviews, right? Nobody wanted to interview me until finally somebody did. A little boutique firm. And that team taught me how to be a strategy consultant so well that I got like 10 jobs in the full-time recruitment. Because I was in Ithaca, nobody shows up in Ithaca, right? I mean, you'd have to be quite lost to be in Ithaca, right? And so my brother was an undergrad in Boston, and so I literally advised him that I would be staying with him in his dorm until I got a job. And I literally moved and moved. What I did was literally find alums. Alums of my college, alums of my master's degree, and literally networked myself until I got an interview, and I made it super easy. I'm like, I'm here, right? Just open the place up for 45 minutes and you'll see what you can decide to. The other piece of advice that I have is, in the United States, we have incredibly rigorous and well-oiled recruiting machineries. People go to certain schools. They hire everyone from that school. Right? By the way, the people hiring there are from that school. They actually know everything about who took what class. They want to go back there. Right? That's not how Europe and Asia and Africa work. And so even though I think most of us at some point in time want to work in the US, that's a really dumb strategy. Because getting a job in company X San Francisco is a lot harder than company X in Joburg. Period. Why? Because people like you are knocking down the door in Deloitte, San Francisco, but they're not in Joburg. Right? An incredibly talented MBA from the United States right, is not available in Eastern Europe. They're not even available in Western Europe, except for the INSEAD ones, right? And so that's the other thing, like just, right. And then the third thing is just like your personal network. Like, I mean, what is it in the US? 6 degrees of separation? You're 6 degrees of separation from people in every firm. And then that's what I would actually do. I mean, it's not easy, right? It's the problem I had, right? I literally like camped out. Like I literally told my professor, you may flunk me. I'm not showing up until I have a job. So, I don't recommend you do that, right? Professor Gross. Okay, guys.
So over here, my name is Medidio from South Sudan, Africa.
There you go.
I have two things. So you mentioned the second step of the case interview. I was wondering if you could just give some examples of, recurring frameworks that interviewees use.
I only use 2, right? I use the 3 C's for everything, right? I like literally either there's customer demand that it's segmented or not, right? There's actually a competitor selling to a particular segment well or not, or there's an unmet need, and there's something I have in my actual kitty of weaponry that can actually disrupt that or not. That's all growth cases, all market-driven cases, all go-to-market cases I solve the same way. And similarly, profitability cases, I just use the P&L because there's no way to go wrong with it, right? It's me, see, right? And by definition, right, it's a closed loop system. Nothing can escape me, right? And so on the revenue side, either price is a problem, volume is a problem, or mix is a problem. And on the cost side, depending on the case, it's either fixed variable or it's SG&A and COGS. And literally, I believe that 80% of cases in the world can be solved. So that's what I use.
The second thing has to do with the recommendation. So, we all know that one of the, lasting critiques of consulting industry is that with people, as you said earlier, show me your watch and I'll tell you what the time is. We go into the company, we're given a problem, we go and delve into the data and the analytics, we come up with recommendations, and people say, most of the times, we don't know what the outcome and the impact of these recommendations are. That is, the work of consulting. Consultants is hard to quantify. And so where is the industry in that aspect? If I'm going to be a consultant, I want to make sure that my recommendation actually do make an impact. How do I make sure that happens?
It's firm specific, so I can actually answer for my firm, right? So our engagements don't end when people stop paying us, is the short answer, right? The consultants assigned to the case get reassigned, but I don't. And so I meet regularly with all of my clients, as long as that management team is in that company. And so I know whether the recommendation is true or not. At a macro level, and those who were in the prior class with me have heard this, we literally, we track a portfolio of Bain clients as if we had bought the stock the day we started. And so, we track it in the Nikkei, in the FTSE, in the Australian market, in the S&P, right? And it's about a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1. So as long as it's going around that, right, that is probably a good indicator that we're adding value. It's not that we're adding that value creation, right? It's that we've picked our clients really well. That's what we did, right? We picked people who were going to take our advice and do something.
Over here.
I had a question more on interview questions themselves.
Yes.
While interviewing a client, or not a client, while interviewing a potential employee, do you have any interview questions that you feel are more effective than others, and why do you feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I like to get a sense of how self-aware people are. And so I ask a lot of questions about how self-aware you are. So I will actually ask you, like, what are your best strengths, right? What are your biggest weaknesses? I always ask people that don't like you, what would they say to me about you, right? And those are not easy, right? Those are not easy. There's no excellent way of answering them. You know, there was some HR firms that used to say, like, do a J with it, right? Take it, go down, and then explain how it's no longer a problem, right? That's not really true, so, right? But it's a very human moment, and I want to see you as a human too, right? Like, for 40 minutes, I already got to quiz you on whether you can actually do gymnastics in your head. Now I want to see you as a human. That's what I'll ask. And I'll ask uncomfortable questions.
Up front.
Are you going to ask me what people that don't like me say?
No. First of all, let me thank you for your insightful speech. My name is Sergey, I'm an MBA student at ASU. So my question is, since you're a partner, what's your view on consulting industry? In particular, let's say all these big four companies right now utilizing and getting into management consulting, and it used to be specialization of these big three, right? And as well as, like, we know economy is growing right now, but probably fees will be the challenge. So do you have any type of models or future prospects how you can utilize workforce and like lend it to your clients, I would say so.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is I am not one of those that thinks that Bain is great and our direct competitors are great and everyone else is a disaster. Quite the opposite. I believe that's an incredible amount of talent in all sectors of consulting, right? There's the big four are amazing at these massive implementations that honestly, I don't know how to do them. The specialists, right, have a level of expertise and repeatability that I don't have. And the boutiques are able to actually deliver amazing value without fixed overheads at prices points that I could never hit. So my first answer is I believe that there's peaceful coexistence would be the first thing. The second thing that I'd say is we are not immune to the digital revolution, right? And so I used to sell time and expenses, right? I used to sell my brain. That's it. Now, right, and it was all inside my four walls. And now, right, I work with a bunch of partnerships to deliver anything at a client that sells a lot more than time and expense, right? I'm probably going to install some type of system or something. When I do a supply chain case these days, first thing I'll do is I'll build a digital twin of somebody's supply chain. I'm going to sit it on a LlamaSoft platform. That's not mine, right? That's LlamaSoft. But I will actually sit it and I'll actually do modeling of what would happen if I add warehouses or take warehouses out. And that will probably, A, lead to the first iteration of recommendations, go build warehouses or take them out. But I'm also going to give them this tool so that they don't need to hire me again. So the world is fundamentally changing. I also think that the type of people we hire are going to change. So we're still going to hire MBAs, but I kind of need also other types of people that are not MBAs. Like data scientists are going to become really important in my business. Very important.
We have time for 3 more, and we have in the back.
My name is Larissa, and I have more of a consulting type of question for you.
Yes.
So in the past probably like 40, 50 years, there's a big trend that big companies, like the big fish companies, pretty much are growing in terms of mergers and acquisitions.
Yes.
So given the activity has shifted a little bit now, if I'm a client, like I'm doing a consulting work right now for a big corporation, that its biggest growth is merger and acquisition. And one thing that has stopped me to think about it and kind of notice is, where is the fine line, or if you see a shift where that's going to start to shrink in terms of being the reliability of this is how we're going to grow because of automated machines that will probably take place and outsourcing?
It's a good question. In the short term, I expect that M&A will go up. And it's going to go up in 2 ways. Cyclically, it's going to go up because we're going to have a recession. And in certain sectors, people are really weak already structurally. That's going to be the nail in the coffin. I think they're going to be bought. That's number one. The second thing is I expect an enormous amount of acquisition activity from the incumbents in industries buying the insurgents in industries. And so it's not, a retailer buying another retailer. It's Target, right, or Target, buying a crowdsourcing shopping network to do the same thing in delivery. I expect a lot of that activity to happen. And I'm an optimist, and so I would say that there's something really interesting about what if that crowdsourcing shopping network can be scaled by Target. That could be a lot of growth. So I expect scale M&A activity to happen in sectors that are shrinking and also as part of the recession. And I expect scope M&A activity to happen as incumbents buy insurgents.
Over here in the middle.
So on a lighter note, I just had a question regarding your cross-cultural experience. So have you had a case before where you've been working with an international client and you had a hard time just understanding how to make things work with them, just with a cross-cultural challenge, and if you came out with a solution after that?
It's an interesting question. I do remember when I first moved to Australia, I couldn't understand a thing of what they said. But I mean, and I spoke pretty darn good English, right? But I was like looking at their lips. I'm like, I have no idea what they're saying. And I thought, I'm gonna get fired. And so I literally went to the Australian Bainies. I'm like, you gotta talk to me for like hours, right? Until I actually understand what the hell you people say. And so that was hard, but that was just sort of me not being very smart. On the cross-cultural front, it has been less about an international assignment because you very quickly know the answer. In Spain, you don't show up with a small pack. Even if you're not going to cover the slides, it has to be thick. Because it's literally like, I paid you a lot of money. Show me that you did a lot of work, right? I mean, it might as well be blank, but no, right? So you don't show up with that. You show up, all dressed up because you're a service provider. If you show up with a big pack to a boardroom in the United States, they just send you out of the room, right? It's more. I've gone into companies that I'm like, I don't know how to get you guys to make a decision. But I'm in a $2 billion business. That's super simple, right? I sit down on Monday morning with the executive team. We make a decision. It gets implemented on Tuesday. Right? The middle layer sits in that building, right? One floor down. What about when I'm working with a 50 billion multinational, right? With offices in 80 countries. And how do I actually get a decision made in the boardroom to percolate all the way to the front line? And so those have been my hardest assignments, right? Again, I have always been obsessive about results. I don't want to create, and I think that's the sort of Bain training in me. I don't want to create a deck that doesn't create value. So the idea of being in a boardroom and shaking hands with everyone is useless today. It's only interesting if when we shook hands around, got to the front line. And sometimes I'm literally like, oh my God, I have no idea how to get to layer 12 here, right? It's gonna be super. And we've developed over time, about 10 years ago, I was telling Professor Gross last night, we ended up hiring a bunch of PhDs in industrial psychology and saying, just ride along us and watch us interact with clients and watch the results and tell us what in our results delivery model is not working. And that has created a part of our toolkit that I think is pretty amazing and quite differentiated. I've never seen anything like it.
And our last question.
Make it good. Don't disappoint me.
So I'm also a WP Carey studying economics, and I was wondering with your strong background in economics, especially at Cornell, how has that helped you in your projects in a way that others with other backgrounds has not?
That's very interesting. So I have a bias, so I like economists, right? But economists are amazing at doing a few things. First, they simplify the world with assumptions so that they can actually answer the question, right? And then they actually analytically look at whether it holds, and then they relax some assumptions to see what the impact is. That's not very different from what I do, right? That's not very different from what I do. I call it answer first, right? But I write a hypothesis based on a bunch of assumptions, and then I go to work to see if the assumptions hold. And so I think that the economics is an amazing profession to become a consultant, right? Because it's basically problem solving based on assumptions, which is what we do. Problem solving based on assumptions. Engineering is more linear logical, right? It's A leads to B, that leads to C, that leads to D, which is one of the great things in my profession. The problem is that engineers never make assumptions, because if you make the wrong assumption, the bridge falls. That's a really bad thing. With economists, if you make the wrong assumption, less people read your paper. That's it. Let me be clear. And so the engineers are amazing on the linear logical side. They have a hard time being what I call 80-20. I'm like, I don't need the whole data. I just need the right answer, right? By the way, in my business, the T doesn't have to be greater than 2. I don't need to be statistically significant. I just need to be right. Right? That's the only test that I do. Right? Professor Gross.
Can I please ask a question here, even though we run out of questions? Please.
Definitely. Definitely.
You were saying that.
You want to know more about the economists?
That's exactly right. Okay, you're sitting there, I'm a banker, and our executive committee is sitting there every Monday morning for 2 or 3 hours talking about how we run our business. And our biggest problem is the frontline people, which we talked about now and earlier today, are the ones who deal mostly with the clients, and we're very far removed from them. We, I have to admit, didn't hire you, we hired McKinsey, but we
that was the problem.
couldn't come to a conclusion about how to get those frontline people to act adequately to make our clients happy. A lot of turnover, a lot of inadequate training, and so forth. So forget the McKinsey comments. What do you think is a way to get the message down to those people?
Well, the problem is that most people would design the new behaviors of the front line in the executive room or in a Bain office, which is ridiculous because none of us have been bank tellers, and we will never be bank tellers, right? So what do? You grab the top bank tellers, right, and you fly them to a lovely location, and you have 7 days to redesign the behaviors that you think will allow us to cross-sell, or whatever your objective is, and you will become the trainers. Right? People don't do that, right? We sit in the executive room like, I don't want them to cross-sell more. You know, McKinsey Bain, go build a program to cross-sell, right? And you have all these Harvard-educated, T-Bird-educated MBAs designing what a teller is going to do. It's a disaster, right? And so I believe in tiger teams. And by that I mean grab your best 5 tigers, have them, point them in the right direction, have them give you the answer, have them become the trainer.
Well, that.
I already got a gift.
Please don't judge us. Thank you for reiterating.
Yeah.
I'm definitely scared we were going to get some angry tweets. But anyway, again, thank you all so much for coming. Before we give the official special thanks, obviously, to Hernan, I wanted to give a couple shout outs. Thank you to Professor Hunsaker for letting us interrupt his class. He ended his class 45, probably like 50 or 55 minutes early, just so that we could do this. So, and he gave us his room. So big thanks to that. Big thanks to the Thunderbird's marketing team, and obviously the Career Management Center. The CMC, Helen and Angelique did a lot for this. And then obviously to Professor Gross for bringing Hernan here. And then lastly for Hernan. And now we can go down to 11:30, enjoy some appetizers, and get to know each other. So thanks so much for coming, and let's give a big round of applause for Hernan.